Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to share with you some thoughts and comments that I have about this film, which is Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, or Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, from 1985, directed by Danny Steinman. This happens to be the Blu-ray taken from the Great Scream Factory Blu-ray box set that was released earlier this year in 2020. This video is not meant to be a review of this film. It's a casual chat or conversation about my experiences with this film, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. So I will be talking about spoilers and specific plot points, but this is, as I say, a casual chat or conversation, in case you are interested. So with that, where to begin a discussion about this very intriguing film, Part 5, A New Beginning? I suppose I can say from the outset that this is a film that I first encountered during the VHS days. As I say, I'm a part of the VHS rental store generation, and so I watched a lot of these films in the 80s, and my first entry points into the world of Friday the 13th were Friday the 13th Part 3 and Friday the 13th Part 5. So this film is among the very first of the series that I happened to see. So maybe that might have a lot to do with my outlook on the film. But in any event, at the time I did see it, I regarded it as being a Friday the 13th film. It's called Friday the 13th. It has, or it employs the character or myth of Jason Voorhees, but as we know, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I'll try to address that later on in this video. But it seemed to have all the trappings and traits of this kind of slasher film known as Friday the 13th. And of course, later on, as I explored more of the films in the series, I of course began to realize and understand the scope of the myth of Jason, how the character of Jason was used in the previous films, especially 2, 3, and 4. And with that exploration, I began to reassess the place of Part 5 in the overall context of the series, again, all the way up to this particular point, which was around the mid-1980s. Still, I have this sense of, shall we say, nostalgia every time I review, or not review, but every time I look back on this film. And it's not just nostalgia, too. There are a lot of aspects that I consider to be very entertaining and quite outrageously entertaining in that campy sort of slashery, fun sort of way that these films tend to operate in. Now, it's a very violent film. There's a lot of nudity in it, and it's certainly not a film that's not for everyone, that's for sure, as is the case for many of these other films in the series. So I don't expect the film to be one that everyone will enjoy. But as I say, for me, with the Friday the 13th films that I've experienced, this always is one of the most entertaining for me for a number of reasons. So I suppose the first thing to talk about in terms of the substance of the film itself is we have to talk about Jason Voorhees, right, or his relative absence in the film. Of course, there is the myth of Jason Voorhees as used by certain characters here and as referred to by certain characters here. And in fact, we do get glimpses of the real Jason in terms of visions and dream sequences, etc. But as we know, the main antagonist, the real antagonist of this film, the person that is doing the killings, is not Jason Voorhees, but it is in fact Roy, the paramedic. And because of this, this film is often seen to be a very much a different film from the entire series, and oftentimes it's considered by a lot of people to be maybe among the worst of the series, if not the worst in the series. And one of the primary reasons cited for that is the lack of Jason Voorhees and the building up of this myth of Roy and Joey, which seems to be coming out of nowhere, basically. I mean, there is no hint of the Roy-Joey myth, as far as I understand it, in any of the films that came up prior to Part 5. So what gives, right? What's going on here? So I was never necessarily against this film because of the lack of Jason Voorhees in that respect. In fact, I thought that the film operated really well as a kind of slasher genre mystery. Who is the killer? Because the film does set up this mystery aspect. It doesn't show the killer's face or mask immediately. So it's all done with a lot of close-ups on hands and feet and gesture, rather than looking at the figure or the frame, the bodily frame that we know as Jason Voorhees in past films, for example. So we don't necessarily get a sense of who the killer is until the final reveal in the final act of the film. With Pam and Reggie and the rain, and then Tommy, and that wonderfully extended showdown in the rain, and all the discovery in it. And it's brilliant in terms of its outrageousness and the slasher genre. So, in other words, the film does set up the fact that it is a kind of slasher mystery. Who is doing the killings? And there are a number of suspects along the way. First of all, we are privy to the information that Jason Voorhees is dead. He may have been cremated, although the fact that there is room for the possibility that maybe he wasn't cremated, although people think he was cremated, that's an interesting little plot twist in and of itself. But in any event, we understand that Jason Voorhees is dead, I suppose, due to the events of the previous film, The Final Chapter. And so it seems to be a pretty definitive end for the character. However, there are these killings that are happening here. So, who is the killer? So the film does set up a number of possibilities. So it could be, for example, Vic. It could be Tommy. It could be one of the other characters that we meet. It could be, for example, Dr. Matt. It could be one of the other people who are at Pinehurst. It could be maybe a Junior or Ethel, I'm not sure, any one of these characters. Or it could be Roy, right? And so there is a lot of setup and a lot of possibility, and it plays out that one of these characters is in fact doing the killings. This is interesting because, in a way, this takes us back to the really roots of the first film, Friday the 13th, and the mystery element there. Who was doing the killings in that film? Because, as we know, from Part 2 onwards, the Jason myth was established from the sequel. But in the original film, we don't have that myth necessarily played out in terms of the slasher elements, but we have something else going on. So, in that way, Part 5 is very much a parallel to the first film, Friday the 13th, because we have the setup of the revenge drama that is the motivating factor for these killings to occur. And indeed, there is even further parallel between Part 1 and Part 5 by the very fact of the reasoning for the killings, the death of a child, and the perceived guilt of the people who were in the area at the time of such death occurring. And so that is the story of Mrs. Voorhees, and that is the story of Roy. And Roy takes it to this absurd level, as we know. He seems to take it out on everyone except Vic, who was the person who actually did the unspeakable, terrible deed on poor Joey with his chocolate cheeks. But right, so we don't know what Roy did, what his plans were for Vic, because once Vic is in the car and he drives away, we never see him again. And so we don't know that. But all we know is that Roy seems to be taking it out on everyone else who's there, including people who weren't there, people like Pete and Vinny, Rat-a-tat-a-tooey and that thing, and also Demon and Anita, ooh baby, right? I don't think they were there, right? And Pete and Vinny weren't there. There might have been a case for someone like, say, Billy. Remember, we have the Lana-Billy relationship too that's expressed, and of course they fall victim to Roy. I don't know how guilty Lana was in the whole thing that happened between Vic and Joey, etc. So the point here is that Roy seems to be taking his revenge out on a lot of people. So maybe that's an indication of how far off this event about the death of his son has taken him, and the extremes to which Roy is willing to go in order to achieve what he perceives to be the ends to the purpose to his carnage and to his chaos. Speaking of Roy, I must say in his defense that he is showing a lot of physical fortitude and strength. Although he is not a superhuman guy, right? He is a regular guy, right? And there's a great moment where it's, oh, you talking to me? You talking to me? So there are those great moments of the ordinary seeming Roy. And then when he is revealed with the Jason mask, although it is the blue diamond mask, of course, because that's a subtle clue that this isn't the real Jason, right? But when he is revealed in terms of the Jason look, he's not just doing his thing as an ordinary guy, but he's crashing through doors. He's traversing time and space in an inhuman way. For instance, he's in the house. Pam and Reggie run out through the rain. They run through the woods. They go to the road. They find the paramedic car, and they see the one guy dead there. And then Roy a la Jason, emerges from the back there. It's an impossible traversing of time and space, but Roy manages to do it. It's an incredible feat. And I mentioned he crashes through the door a little bit earlier. He does some door crashing that rivals Jason, especially Part 4 Jason, in an extremely effective way. I mean, I would say that perhaps there's a moment in Part 3 where Jason goes through a door, although arguably that's a dream sequence at the end. But still, I would say that if you're going to rank the door crashing Jasons, Roy's door crashing is I would say pretty high up there in the ranking. But this is an example of how effective I think Roy is as a character. I mean, he's very effective and he's very strong. Even when he's nearly run over by Reggie's tractor, I mean, he takes a licking and he still is ticking, And so that's the physical strength of Roy. I mean, he fights all the way to the very end. So this is very reminiscent, too, of the Mrs. Voorhees character, how she was just relentless and physically strong, and she wouldn't give up until the very end. So the same is true for Roy. There's something about his strength that is overpowering. So that's very, and he's not a zombie, he's not any kind of superhuman character, he's just Roy. So, and his anger is driving him to these extreme limits. And so that's a very interesting thing too, because if we were going to carry on the Friday the 13th and Friday the 13th Part 5 parallels, then what we might have seen was, this is the establishment of the Roy-Joey myth. And so because the first film and the second film were Mrs. Voorhees and Mrs. Voorhees' son Jason, maybe in Part 5 and Part 6, in an alternate reality, we could have seen Roy's myth set up in Part 5, and then maybe Joey, who died in Part 5, coming back to life in the way that Jason kind of came back to life in Part 2. So maybe we could have had an alternate universe where Friday the 13th Part 6 could have been the return of Joey and the creation of the Joey myth. I don't know. But anyway, speaking of the Joey scene, I mentioned the chocolate Vic with the axe. I don't know what Dr. Matt and Pam were thinking, but you don't give someone like Vic an axe. So, but any event, he had access, and I thought that killing with Joey was very shocking because it was very abrupt. It happened all of a sudden. One wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen in this type of film, because all the way up to part 5 we have been witness to all these scenes involving Jason and killings and the like, and here we have someone who's obviously not Jason, and then it's really early on in the film, and boom, he had this act of rage and violence occurring, which is very stunning and very shocking. So that is an indication of the kinds of twists and turns that one, I suppose, might come to expect from a film like Part 5, A New Beginning. And speaking of that scene, I should say also that another thing that's very interesting about this film is the depiction of violence and on-screen violence and special effects. If you notice in a scene like this, there isn't a lot of stuff that's actually shown. It's all to do with the quick zooms in, or the zoom ins, and then the sound effects and the movement and the screams, etc. And then we see the after effects a few seconds later, with the aftermath of what happened to Joey's body, etc., under the sheet there. It's really an outrageous moment. But the point here is that much of the on-screen violence that we see is of a similar nature, in that it's edited in a way that we don't necessarily see a lot of the stuff. We see stuff that is maybe a quick flash and then a sudden close-up here and things of that nature, but it's not overly the camera doesn't linger too much on those sorts of things, and it's a lot to do with a quick flash, a jump scare, an edit, and a sound effect and the like. And so I think that makes for very effective editing. It's very much akin to the Tom Savini school of special effect and editing to create the illusion of violence, and I think that's what's going on for a lot of the stuff here. Granted, of course, the illusion is made even further realized by the shots of the aftermath. We see the people lying there in the aftermath of what happened, and that adds further sustenance to the illusion of the violence. Still, the stuff that we imagine happening on screen is pretty horrific and pretty intense stuff. So it rivals a lot of the types of scenes like this that we have seen in previous films. And with that also, this is a film with a high body count. I mean, it's through the roof, even for a Friday the 13th film. And a lot of the characterizations and a lot of the setups, I would say, are so outrageous and so over the top that they can be bordering on parody and camp, which is one of the things why I think this film it actually works, because it is a horror film, it's a slasher film, and it's also a camp and parody film, and it's a comedy. There are just bucket loads of comic moments here, and it's a lot of this sort of strange, creepy moments combined with these moments of outrageous, humorous dialogue and the like that creates this. It might seem as a confusing sort of mix of tones, but in fact I think it's operating in a way that is actually very clever in my view. If we take a step back and we remember that this is from 1985, and because this is the 5th film, we've already seen so many Friday the 13th films up to this film. Plus, outside the Friday the 13th series, we have a whole bunch of slasher films and horror films that are really saturating the marketplace. And so where to go with this series, especially with the previous film being the final chapter? How do you go from here? I mean, you have to start, as you say, with a new beginning, a new antagonist, a new mystery, which will hopefully sustain the suspense. Also, I think what's going for this is that it goes in a different direction. I think it goes more for the camp and the humor and the parody as much as it does for the slasher and gore aspects. And I think that turn also helps its sustainability going forward, and at least for me anyway. because whenever I see this film, I'm shocked and I'm horrified and I'm laughing a lot at many of the scenes because they are laugh out loud funny things. And maybe the film doesn't necessarily mean for many of these moments to be funny. Maybe it's laughing at the film rather than with the film. But in whatever mode it happens, it happens. And if it happens, then it's great because that is a form of entertainment. And so I look at the film in that regard, and if I do and when I do, I consider it to be one of the most entertaining films in the series for me. Speaking of the body count, I suppose we should just try to go through all the characters here as much as possible. So we have a lot of characters. We have, now I'm going to try to get all of them. If I miss any or if I get anyone incorrect, please correct me in the comments. So there is Dr. Matt and Pam, who head this Pinehurst facility. And then there's Tommy, of course, the John Shepherd version of Tommy, complete with fight stance and everything. He knows how to fight, and he's a martial artist now, and everything. But he's also very brooding and moody. And then we have Reggie and Gramps or George, and then we have Demon and Anita, and then Billy and Lana, Vinny and Pete, and then we have Tina, Eddie, Robin, Violet, Jake, and I think that's it. Yes. So we have, this is the continuation of the great characters that we've seen throughout the Friday the 13th series thus far. So the first film, of course, we had Bill, Alice, Brenda, Steve Christie, Ted. I'm sorry, not Ted. Ned, Jack, and Marcy, and Annie, and Mrs. Voorhees. And then part 2 we had Ginny and Paul and Ted, and Jeff and Sandra, Terry and Scott, Vicky and Mark, and Muffin. And then part 3 we had Chris and Rick, and Debbie and Andy, and Shelley and Vera, and Chuck and Chili, and Ali, Fox and Loco, and then the beginning Harold and Edna. And then part 4 we had Axel and Nurse Robbie, and then the Jarvises, Mrs. Jarvis, Trish and Tommy, and then Gordon, and then we had Rob, who was and Rob and Sandra from part 2, of course, and then we had Ted and Jimmy, and Paul and Sam, Sarah and Doug, and then the twins, Tina and Terry, I think. And yeah, so, and then part 5 now, so we have a continuation of the characters. So a lot of characters. Oh, and I forgot also, for part 5 we also had Ethel and Junior and Raymond, the lip licking Raymond, and also were there any other characters? There's so many, the sheriff and the mayor, I suppose, but this is just adding to the body count, and just so many events happening, so many people appearing and then disappearing at will. And I forgot part 4, of course, the hitchhiker with the banana. And so, right, so, and then we have so many outrageous set pieces going on. I mentioned a little bit about the Pete, Vinny, and Demon and Anita, ooh baby, and rat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tooey, and enchiladas, and more toilet scenes, and we get a lot of toilet scenes, and in part 3, etc. And now we get another toilet scene in part 5. And the death scenes are quite horrific in this. We get a lot of quick flashes, a great dance with Violet, great, I suppose, the eye of the beholder, of course, but it's still very memorable. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think a dance-off between Violet and Jimmy from part 4 is very apt indeed. I'd love to see who would win that. Violet has some really, I mean, she's able to dance in a way. I can't dance that way, so that's very impressive for my book. And this adds to the further tone of it, too, because, as I say, this has some great camp, outrageous moments that just sustain the entertainment factor. Pam, as a character, she's very aggressive towards Reggie. Come on, what's gone? What's wrong? What's wrong with you, Reggie? What's wrong? And then when he falls, she doesn't say, are you okay? She says, get up, get up. And then suddenly they see Jason, and then Reggie with that red jumpsuit, and the screaming in the rain, and all these people, being found, and the various kills that happen all of a sudden, Ethel and Junior, and Ethel with the tomato, yet another scene in a Friday the 13th film with fruits and vegetables. We saw it, of course, in part 4 with the banana and the hitchhiker, and I suppose by extension part 3 with Andy and Shelley juggling the fruit into the camera for the 3D effects. So there is that. There are those callbacks, I suppose. And there is the great music too, which is, I think, very much meant to be a chaotic mess, and it is. It's which is great. It's almost like it's paralleling the chaos inside Roy's mind when he becomes unhinged after the death of Joey. And also, there's a great moment in the film where it's the drive to at night to visit Demon, and it's the car, cut to car again, cut to car again, that's a great sequence. That is an absolute great sequence. So again, a great use of music and fueling the suspense and intrigue going forward, as well as the chaos. Oh, how much chaos there is in this film, my goodness. And there is a lot of it seems to be maybe gratuitous nudity scenes, and there seems to be a lot of that sort of thing going on. My understanding that is that maybe there were more scenes of violence and sex that were intended, but that had to be cut out for reasons of trying to obtain an R rating in the United States. But in any event, the version that we have here, while there is there is a lot of violence and there's a lot of nudity, but as I say about the violence, it's a lot of it is implied violence, and so I think that makes that's an indication of how effective the editing and the atmosphere is in this film. All in all, I do want to say again that I can completely understand if people acknowledge this as being one of the worst films. I completely get it. And maybe it's just too much going this way or that way. So I'm not here to try to convince you otherwise. But what I can say is that for me, I do understand how it's seen to be a little bit of an unusual Friday the 13th film, but it does set up a lot of things that I think are in keeping, in the spirit anyway, of films like we saw in, say, part 1. Also, there are scenes that are very effective, very creative, and there's a camp, outrageous factor that is like a parody or homage or maybe unintentional humor. But whatever the case is, it is still a very humorous film. There's a lot of comedy that also sustains its entertainment factors for me quite successfully so. And this is all therefore to say that this film, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, is for me a very fun and entertaining one. One of my favorites in the series, actually. I sometimes cite it as being my favorite, actually, because of all the mix of various tones that are happening at once. It's chaos. It's chaos in a Friday the 13th package, and I think that's one of the things that I really admire about it on a sort of personal level. But and of course we get the mystery of Tommy. So this is of course continuing on the Tommy Jarvis saga. We'll of course see it continued in part 6. There's a really creepy way that the film ends too with Tommy. We don't quite know what's going to happen, and in fact perhaps it's sowing the seeds for what we will see in a film like, say, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, in terms of the traveling of the spirit of Jason or something, or to that effect. So whatever the case may be, it's setting up Tommy Jarvis in a really peculiar, interesting way. A nice continuation from part 4. Of course, we will see how this arc plays out in part 6, but in any event, I thought the way that it turned here was very interesting, all the way down to the martial arts Tommy and his aggressive. He is so aggressive here. You push him a little bit, he'll just go out and like throw you on a table or something. It's really quite fantastic and amazing. But anyway, so that's this is again part of the Tommy Jarvis cycle of films, and this is Friday the 13th: A New Beginning, Part 5. I should end also that I remember when I was a kid, I had that Leonard Maltin movie guide. Do you remember those? And in those, there was a huge list of films with short write-ups, and ratings for each of the films there, from 4 stars all the way down to 0 stars, or bombs. That's what they were called. And I remember, I think part 5 got a bomb rating, or was, maybe half a star or bomb rating, I forget exactly. And it was a very negative write-up. But I remember the one positive thing that was written about part 5 in the Leonard Maltin Guide was clever title. Because of course it's the use of the new beginning, because it's the only way you could title a film like this after the final chapter. So I thought that was right. I agreed with Leonard Maltin, or whoever wrote that write-up for that book. But as I say, it's a film that is really entertaining, and if you look at it from a certain angle, it's a lot of fun, even in the context of Friday the 13th. So this is Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. So anyway, my friends, thank you very much, and cheers.